meeting. Just a brief reminder that this is a community meeting and will be posted publicly on YouTube, and the internet is forever. So whatever you're saying may or may not be replayed. I am still looking for a note taker. If you're willing, please just let me know and take notes as you see fit. Otherwise, I'll be doing it. And last but not least, we will be having a glorious demo from Amazon EKS, some release updates, Kep of the Week, some SIG updates, and then shout outs at the end. And without further ado, I am handing it off to Bryce Carman from Amazon EKS.
Hi, everyone. So I am Bryce Carman, Senior Software Engineer with Amazon Elastic Container Services for Kubernetes, or EKS if you don't want to spit out the whole mouthful. So I just wanted to briefly show what we got going on and what we're doing a little differently. So with that, I'm just going to show us how we create a cluster and how stuff generally is everything works upstream. We'll work on Amazon EKS as well. So with that, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. All right, is that working for everyone? You see my browser? Perfect. All right. So of course, can read all about the Amazon EKS on the link. From the main Amazon console page, you can find EKS, and brings you to your EKS page. When you start, you'll get plenty of information about it, but I've already got some clusters created. So first thing I'm going to do is just show you one of my existing clusters. Basic information about the cluster, about everything that needs to be able to connect to the cluster with your config. So I'm going to show creating a cluster. So fun fact, I like to name my clusters after group of animals. So who knew that a group of frogs is a army of frogs? So this time I'm going to create a group of goats, which is a goat tribe. What we're really configuring here is the control plane part of the Kubernetes cluster. All the actual worker nodes are all part of the user's account, but everything that makes up the control plane is all managed by Amazon EKS. So what we're really configuring here is the, I guess, interaction between the two. Right, so I'm selecting the role. This is the role that Kubernetes will take as it manages resources in the user's account, in your account. So make sure you're restricting, restrict stuff so you can create, example, load balancers and manage all the security groups that need to happen behind the scenes, but doesn't give Amazon EKS full administrator rights in the account for that cluster. So for my uses, I'm just using one account, but you could use any number of, or excuse me, one role. You could use any number of roles per cluster, one per cluster. I've already set up a VPC where all my worker nodes and where all the worker nodes are going to live. And as part of selecting that, these are the subnets that are already part of that VPC. I'm just going to go ahead and use all those subnets. The security group is what is applied to basically the Kubernetes control plane, so that by default it's locked down, so that only the minimal amount of network traffic can go between control plane and the worker nodes. So it's secure by default. So it's important to understand, I think, that as I mentioned, the control plane is hosted and managed by EKS in the EKS service accounts. So there's no outside communication between the control plane and the worker nodes besides what's exposed by, for example, the API server like the load balancer in front of the API server. So there's no direct access besides that, because they're actually in separate VPCs. So I kicked off creating that cluster, but to fast forward a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and jump over to a cluster that I've already created. So I'm going to skip the time it takes to create the actual Kubernetes cluster and set up the worker nodes. So I've got my kube config already set up, so I can talk to my clusters. I'm going to be using my my Frog Army cluster because it's awesome. So before I go on, I want to talk about the user authentication for the clusters. So we're using the authenticator that was originally created by Heptio, and then through some collaboration, we made it useful or made it usable by EKS for the needs we have. So as part of I believe Kubernetes 110, change was made to client authentication from kubectl, so that we have the we can use this external plugin to be able to do the client authentication. So what this is doing is it's using your IAM credentials, which is the Amazon account credentials. So this is going to be using the same set of credentials I'd be using if I was using the AWS command line tool. So we're not doing cert-based client authentication. It's all using IAM, talking to IAM to do the authentication of the user. So talking to my Frog Army cluster, and since I created the cluster, I'm admin by default there. So going on, what I just want to quickly demo was being able to create just using Helm tiller to create a WordPress site. So by default, tiller isn't installed. So I'm just quickly installing tiller. I'm let's see, this comes up. So it takes a minute for that to come up. So that's up. So Helm's up and tiller's running. Just going to create a namespace. And going to leverage Helm to do all the dirty work of creating everything for WordPress. So as part of this, it's creating the load balancer, which is going to be a ELB, Elastic Load Balancer in AWS, and it's also using a EBS persistent volume. So all those parts are in my account, in the user's account. So everything that's created, I'll be able to see as part of the normal AWS console. So this is coming up. So it takes a little bit of time for the actual DNS and everything to come up. So I'm going to switch over to a different cluster that I already have that already has WordPress installed. Which one are you? Fun fact, a group of bats is called a cauldron of bats, which is just awesomely appropriate. See, make sure this is, I could put this in a different one, yep. So right now I'm just grabbing the URL of the Elastic Load Balancer. And So here's my WordPress site that is working, fully running on Kubernetes, using all Amazon resources behind the scenes. The other thing I wanted to briefly talk about was networking on EKS. So we have a CNI plugin that provides pod IP addresses without using an overlay network. So it's using it's actually using IP addresses out of the VPC of where my workers are. So no reserving subnets or carving out address spaces. So it's just any address is available to either a node or a pod. So on my VPC, so my VPC is set up as a 10.10/16 address. So this is one of my nodes. It's at 10.10. But if I look at my pods, see it's out of that same 10.10/16 address space. So makes management a bit easier of the IP addresses. No control or anything is needed. It's just a daemon set that runs on each of the worker nodes that allocates the IP addresses within the VPC where and subnet where the node is running. And yeah, so no overhead of overlay or any extra work with that. And that also still integrates with, for example, Calico networking policy, so you can still configure networking policy for those nodes.
You got about a minute left, Bryce?
Well, that's great, because that was the exact last thing I was going to show.
Perfect. So. Mind answering a couple questions from chat?
Flipping over the chat now. All right.
Well, I can read them to you, and you can answer.
Perfect. Yeah.
That? Can you show us kubectl get nodes, kubectl cluster-info?
Yeah, I think I showed one of the nodes. Let me go back to sharing my screen.
Sorry, you did that, and there you go.
So for this cluster, I just have two nodes. Don't know if there's anything that anyone specifically wanted to see on that, but those two nodes. What was the other command we wanted to run?
Cluster info.
Cluster info. So yeah, I was shown as this the master, and it's at the load balancer that's shown in the EKS console.
Cool. Last question, I think. Can we scale masters, or the masters listed? Obviously, there's the masters, but can we scale them?
No, not at this time. It's say more correctly. It's abstracted away from the user, so it's not something that's directly scaled or controlled by the user.
Cool. All right. Appreciate the demo, Bryce. Awesome notes in there too for folks, and thanks for answering questions.
Thanks, everyone.
Next up, Tim Pepper with the 1.12 release updates.
Not too much to say other than our feature freeze milestone date is coming on Tuesday, July 31st. And maybe just to clarify, this is feature freeze in terms of feature definition, not actual implementation. The implementation freeze comes at code freeze, which is not for quite a few weeks yet in September. So there's just feature freeze. We're looking to understand more concretely what the various SIGs are targeting for work across this cycle. And after Tuesday, major feature work that's coming in would need to go through an exception process. So again, just reiterating, we want you to be thinking about your release themes, major work coming intended for the 1.12 release, and associated with that, your plans for documentation and test coverage, and communicating those with SIG release and across your SIG as well, and any other stakeholders you might have. So that's basically it for where we are right now.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. I cannot pronounce his name. I'm going to destroy it. on a rood, and there's nothing pending for a 111 branch at this time. Moving on to KEP of the week, Jordan Liggett, if he's here. I think I saw him come in. He was going to take this away, but just to give you an idea, it is KEP 17, moving component config API types to staging repos. Jordan, take it away.
Yep. Let me get my screen up. And 1 second. Sorry about that.
No problem.
How's that? Can you see that?
Sounds good. Looks good.
Great.
Yeah.
So this is a concerted effort to try to make progress on the goal of taking the configuration that drives the core Kubernetes components from a bunch of loose flags to actual structured configuration objects. And so this KEP kind of lays out the current state of the world, which, to summarize, is that the kubelet has blazed a trail. The kubelet actually has a configuration file format that is defined and is currently in beta, which means that we commit to support that for a certain set of version SKUs and make sure that it can be migrated to a v1 config. The benefits for this are it makes configuration inspectable. It means that we have a common way to represent configuration so that tools that look at your component and ensure that you're following best practices or can warn or flag deprecated or not recommended things, they can look at that config and understand what you are actually running instead of having to look at 1,000 different ways of launching a process via a script or a unit file or a static pod or whatever. And so this KEP is describing kind of all the components that we have in the main Kubernetes repo and what they are currently driven by. Some are driven by internal configuration structs, some are driven by flags only, and then it is looking to move towards a goal of having supported versioned configuration structs that actually make use of the same versioning and conversion mechanisms that our normal REST APIs use. One of the sub-goals is to make sure that those API structs, config structs, are located in repositories and packages so that they can be imported and used by other projects without importing the world, without importing all of Kubernetes or even all of the particular component. And this would enable tools like kubeatom to produce and understand configuration structs that would drive these various components, even if kubeatom was located in a different repo, which is a goal for that. And so if you look through this, there's a lot of discussion around where these should live, what they should look like, making sure that we're paying attention to the ability to import from projects outside of Kubernetes, and make sure that we are not duplicating effort if there are common configuration aspects that a lot of different components need to make use of. And so things like describing connection information for a client, describing some of the leader election and debugging options that are going to be common across several different components, making sure we put those in locations where they can be reused and referenced. So I would encourage you to look over this if you work on any of these components, or if you are involved in driving the deployment and setup of any of these components. Again, the work is staged out. The first step is to start moving the pieces into the right place. And then once we have confidence that they are in the right place, start promoting them from alpha up to beta levels. Let me open the chat and see if there were questions.
No, thank you, Jordan. Just to be abundantly clear with everyone, Jordan volunteered to discuss the KEP in Lucas and STTTS's absence. So thank you, Jordan, for taking the time to do that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I don't want to take credit. I just read the doc. So yeah, all credit goes to those guys.
I just want to say that this stuff is incredibly exciting. I mean, this is such a critical pain point for folks that are managing Kubernetes. So yeah, I'm really excited to see this work move forward.
Awesome. All right. I don't think there's any questions in here. Okay, so Jordan, actually, you are up first with SIG updates for SIG off.
Oh, well, great. Well, I will just keep sharing my screen and
Perfect.
flip over to my notes. So I wanted to call out some of the things that are going on in SIG off in the 1.12 release. And thought I'd start actually by something we don't always talk about a lot, but I think makes a big difference for people using the platform day to day. And that's just some usability improvements that we've made in the 1.12 timeframe. So prior to 1.12, if you were using Kubernetes with multiple authorizers in play, and so this might be a setup like GKE or AWS that combines a webhook authorizer with RBAC authorization. So if you're using multiple authorizers, if you tried to do anything RBAC related, RBAC is good at not letting you escalate your own permissions, but it would not actually honor super user permissions from the other non-RBAC authorizer. And so you would see things like, I'm trying to set up this manifest and I get forbidden despite being a super user on this cluster. And that was just a little crazy making, and there were workarounds you could do, but in 1.12 we will actually consult all authorizers to see if you are authorized to create these things. And so in 1.12, if you're a super user, you may define policy on your cluster. Congratulations. Similarly, prior to 1.12, if you had multiple authorizers in place, the error message that came back from the first one would be what was shown to the user. And so if you ever tried to do something as a service account and weren't permitted to, the webhook authorizer might say, I have no idea who the service account is, and so I'm going to tell you so, and that is a completely confusing error. And so we now indicate errors from all the authorizers. You can say, oh, right, well, one didn't know about the user, but also I didn't have any RBAC policies for this user. And then finally, this is my favorite. I mentioned that RBAC prevents escalation, and if you try to escalate permissions, it gives you an incredibly detailed and incredibly unhelpful error message that tells you all the information you needed to know, and a lot of other information as well. And so this wall of text is what you get if you try to grant a role that has permissions you don't have. And in 1.12, that's been replaced with this, which tells you exactly the permissions that you were trying to escalate and didn't currently have. So we apologize that it took us 12 releases to get here. We'll try to do better. All right, so now on to some actual 1.12 feature work that would be good to highlight. There are improvements being made to the way kubelet deals with certificates. So some of the client Go exec work that went in last release is being enabled for the kubelet so that the kubelet can delegate to an external credential provider. This would let you do things like integrate with a cloud provider to obtain credentials via some other mechanism. It also supports requesting and rotating serving certificates. So you can now delegate obtaining a serving certificate to the CSR API. You still have to pair that with an external approval process, but that will be getting promoted to beta in 1.12. Work is ongoing for improving time-limited and audience-scoped service account tokens. And then there are improvements being made in audit. We're progressing towards V1 for the audit event API. And there is a KEP-in process for dynamically registered webhook backends. So you could add and remove backends to receive audit events. And that's all I have.
Awesome. Thank you. Frederick Branzik, are you around for SIG instrument?
Yep. Let me share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't have I don't actually have any slides. It's just some notes that we took in our meeting. So the first thing that we have announced before, but we wanted to point out once more, we have deprecated Heapster in 1.11 already. And the deprecation timeline going forward is that we are going to be removing setup in 1.12, and it's going to be completely removed in 1.13. Yeah, so I think we have already pointed this out at the KubeCon Developer Summit, but here we are once more, just making sure everyone is aware. Then other work that is going on right now is reworking node metrics. So this is a proposal that, among others, Solly is working on, and this is about basically reworking how all the metric sources work that come together in a node. So things like device plugin, but also container metrics, and all of those kinds of things, that they have a unified kind of expected output in terms of metrics. And there's also some kind of some things about metric standardization in there, in terms of like RFC should, must, and so on. So if you work on anything related to node metrics, then you will want to look at this proposal. And the next thing, and Solly is also working on this, is a large refactoring of the metrics server. So if you are running maybe a non-production environment of the metrics where you are using the metrics server already, then we highly encourage trying out this refactoring. In theory, this should make metrics server actually a lot more stable, but of course, large code changes can have a risk. So if you have the possibility, please try this out. This is pull request number 65 on the metrics server. And the next thing is, this has actually already merged, but there is now an advanced mechanism to configure the Prometheus adapter for the custom metrics API in Kubernetes. So previously, we had a lot of expectations of how your Prometheus server must be labeling metrics in order for them to be able to be used by the metrics server, and this is all a lot more configurable and dynamic now. So basically, you can configure this to your environment rather than having to configure the Prometheus server according to what the metrics adapter expected. And last but not least, we have been disabling a number of end-to-end tests that have been flaking a lot. And these are all only tests that have been involving third-party services, where the third-party service was basically the cause of these flaking services. And they are now behind feature flags in the testing infrastructure. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Next up for SIG AWS is Bob Wise. Bob, take it away. Bob says, hang on a second. Bob, you're muted, by the way.
Hey, everybody. So I attempted to punt on this officially yesterday, but I guess it didn't make it into the agenda. So I guess I need to offer apologies here. As a practice, we don't like to do the update unless we've actually had a chance to review it in the SIG, and we haven't. So
No, that's my mistake, Bob. Sorry.
No update.
All right. Thanks, Bob. Sorry about that. That was an oversight on my part. Announcements. Before I do shout outs, does anybody have any particular announcements, SIG, Kubernetes, or otherwise? All right. Moving on to shout outs. Manjunith Kumatagi for patiently waiting or working through issues that will help us run conformance tests. Other architectures, say ARM4064, for example, it's taken a really long time to get this far, and the end is in sight. Thanks for your hard work across multiple repos and SIGs. So super important for me as I run a lot of ARM stuff. Thank you. Jordan Liggett for always knowing the answer to ... everything and being so available to answer questions. You're an incredible resource, and I'm always grateful to lean on you when I need to. Last but not least, Quentin Hoole for including a how you can contribute slide in the SIG multi-cluster update in today's, or I guess yesterday's community meeting, or last week's community meeting, sorry. Way to model SIG leadership and growing the K8s team by facilitating new/increased participation. And as always, the shoutouts channel on the Kubernetes Slack is a great place to give kudos to anyone and everyone who deserves them. Unless anybody has anything else, that concludes the Kubernetes community meeting. All right. Thank you, everyone.
See you, everybody. Happy Thursday.